What's up, guys? It is Ink and Echo number 53. I'm Josh Gaines. Told you I'd be back. Like a rapper introducing a new album. I don't know. The first single comes on in the album and he's like, I told you I'd be back. I've heard some people say that. Hey, listen, our guest today is Hunter Beaumont, and he is actually one of the pastors of the church that I attend here in Denver. And he has got a great story, like his life story, and just a lot of insight and wisdom. And I just, in the course of going to this church for about a year, just felt like he would be an interesting person to talk to for the show. So, because that's all, really, if you boil it down, that's all we really want to do here, is hear from a lot of unique perspectives. And even though it started out us talking to a lot of musicians, I feel like it's changed. Like, we just want to hear good and interesting stories of people and glean from that. So, and I do just want to say, I would never presume that all or most of our listeners are people of faith or Christians or anything. In fact, I'm pretty sure that's not the case. And I prefer it that way, but I do just want to say, even if you have an aversion to Christianity, or if you are embittered towards the church, or you're flat out atheist, or you're like the most pious Christian there is, don't skip this one, because like I said, Hunter just has a great story. He's got a lot of wisdom to offer, and he's just a really interesting person, and we get into some good stuff that I think is insightful and just useful for everyday life, regardless of worldview and belief. So anyway, all that to say, don't be turned off just because it's a pastor. Listen, okay, little note about the status of Ink and Echo, just briefly. So I guess long story short, Andy and I are going to take a break for the rest of the month of August. So there won't be any episodes coming out for the rest of August, is what it is sounding like right now. We're not planning on stopping or going away, but we just both need a bit of a break of, hitting this every week for a year now. Has worn us down a bit. And, the past few episodes have not been the most exciting thing in the world. And that's, we respect you guys and we love you guys and we want to bring you good content, to use that word. But the state of the last 3 episodes or so has just been kind of, we just throw something together on Sunday afternoon because we just run out of time in the week because other things take priority. So all that to say, we're just going to take a little break. And when we come back in September, presumably, it's possible Ink and Echo will look a little different. I don't know how you guys view our show or how much you even think about it. Maybe everyone literally sounds the same to you and it doesn't matter and you just enjoy it and turn it on and soak it up. But I tend to view it with a little more seriousness, or I guess I have a vested interest, and like I want it to be good and compelling. I don't ever want to just be throwing out garbage or us goofing around, and I think I've said that before. So all that to say, we're taking a little break, and yeah, I don't want to speak too much for Andy with him not on here, but just like the simplest way to say it is he has a lot of things that he's juggling right now and that are related to his music career, and he needs to focus on the things that are literally feeding his family and making him money and just perpetuating this career that he's set up for himself. And Ink and Echo, as much as he enjoys it, is not one of those things that is, paying for his life and livelihood. So, yeah, all that to say, I don't know what it's going to look like from here on. Andy's presence on the mic might not be as often because there's even just the times of day that he and I are both available. They don't coincide very well between my day job and his work life. So anyway, hopefully Andy's not cringing because I'm oversharing, but I like to be transparent about this stuff because it does matter to me. There was a point a week ago where I thought Ink and Echo was completely done. I thought we were going to be 1 year and quit. and like it's over. But that was because I, in typical form, largely misconstrued some things that Andy said and misunderstood, his desires towards the show and stuff like that. It's funny. I've known Andy for over 10 years now, and this show has been like a course, like a college course in learning how to interact with him and communicate with him. And I still don't have it figured out, and that's probably more on my end because I read into things, and I fear that he doesn't like me anymore, or that he doesn't care, or something, or that for some reason he's checked out of my life. And every time I've brought it up, he's just like, "No, everything's fine, man. What are you talking about?" And I'm like, I lost 3 days agonizing about that. So. That might be uncomfortable to hear. I don't know. I don't care. I don't, because that is the way my brain operates, and that's just the reality of how doing something like this is with a friend. So anyway, all that to say, hey, just hit the subscribe button so that you don't like fall out of into the universe and forget about Ink and Echo altogether. But if you just hit subscribe, then there we are. We're going to pop up, bloop, in your feed as soon as we return. Okay, one last thing before we get to my conversation with Hunter Beaumont, and that is I just wanted to share something inspiring that I heard on another podcast this week that goes in the vein of what we talk about often here. And so this was on a podcast called Typology by Ian Morgan Cron. And it is revolving around the Enneagram personality test. And he interviewed a woman named, this is a unique name, Tish Oxenrider. And anyway, she is a type 4 like me. And the little nugget of profundity that I took from this episode was that she said something about when she wakes up in the morning, she's developed a habit for herself where she creates before she consumes, as far as, reading things online or social media or even logging into a computer whatsoever. And I tried it this past week, and it was so surprisingly fruitful. So it's just like it freed me up all of a sudden, because I've talked about here just struggling, going through periods of where writing feels really dry. But my morning routine for the longest time has been like, I get to work, I get a little granola bar and some coffee or something, and then without even thinking about it, without even being very aware of this, I can burn an hour just checking Twitter, checking Reddit, checking email, reading up on things. And then, by the time we get to the end of that, but by the time I get to the end of that, it's like I just feel kind of sludgy and slow, and like I've not absorbed anything valuable, or most likely, or anything that I'm going to remember. It's almost just pure junk entertainment that leaves my head as soon as I look away from it. And so alternatively, I've tried as much as possible to just get to my desk and immediately write for about an hour. And just full disclosure, my job is okay with this. I always get my work done, and creative things in my free time is totally fine. So, but anyway, writing for an hour. And I even think something Robert Rodriguez talked about, the director, was just that when you write first thing in the morning, or when you do something creative, like part of your brain is still a little foggy and asleep, and that whatever voice it is that tells you that your work sucks, or that whatever you're writing is stupid, or that like just basically your own inner condescension, that little voice is still asleep. Kind of. I mean, I know that's just a silly way to look at it, but there is weirdly a freedom to writing first thing in the morning. There's even like some leftover dreamlike state stuff happening. And I have found that it hinders me less, to where if some idea or direction for a story seems a little quirky, early in the morning, Josh is just like, no, go for it. Yeah, let's see what happens. Like, this could be interesting. Whereas 3 or 4 p.m. in the afternoon, Josh would be like, that's dumb. And then I'd agonize over it, and then I'd just get like blocked basically and stop writing. So anyway, for what that's worth, maybe try it, and maybe you operate differently or do things differently. But I do think there's something to this. And I personally am going to try to keep it going, of just go make something and use your brain's like freshest juice to get that out first thing, instead of going and absorbing a bunch of junk that you're not going to remember or learn from. Because I like the idea of optimizing my brain, and especially getting like the good, healthy nectar of creativity first thing in the morning. So, okay, that's about enough of that. Hope you enjoyed it. Again, don't go away. While we take a break from this show, please subscribe and keep us dog-eared on your internet spaces. That doesn't make any sense. Okay, here's my conversation with Hunter Beaumont. I was going to mention, I read Brothers Karamazov. I might have told you this on Memorial Day, so stop me if I did. But read Brothers Karamazov with a reading group, and that, I think, is the only way I got all the way through it. I would have quit on my own.
I'm taking like the Cliff Notes online and reading, every few chapters I'll stop and go read the Cliff Notes summary, and I'll pick up a couple of things like, oh, I think I missed that. You have to. It's lost in translation or in my ignorance.
Right.
Between Russian to the translation to me, it's just, there's a lot that gets missed.
Yes. Yeah, I feel like some of that has got to be cultural and just time period, and to those people in that time, it probably would have made sense. Right. And again, the translation thing. Yeah. But he doesn't, not everything is spelled out as far as the action.
That's right. And it's critical to know. So I'll be reading and I'll go like, I think that guy seduced that girl. I think that's what that meant. I better go check the Cliff Notes. And it's like that's pretty crucial to the plot.
Yes, totally. Yeah. Well, Hunter, welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here. Great to be here.
I know it's weird being in my bedroom just next to all the things, but this room actually gets pretty good sound.
Josh has white and yellow sheets.
Right.
And a great modern pattern on them.
Target bought, keeping it classy from Target. Have you done a podcast before?
I have not.
You have not?
No,
excellent.
This is my maiden voyage.
Okay, good. I mean, you kind of have, I guess, in the sense of sermons being posted, but not in the sense of being interviewed.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So I personally do not know your history, and nor do our listeners, presumably, except Josh Allen. So as brief or as long as you would like, just tell us how you became to be a pastor in Denver in 2017.
Wow, that's a big question.
Yeah.
I am originally from Little Rock, Arkansas, so a Razorback by birth, and my family bounced around Arkansas and then the rest of the South. Growing up, I lived in Little Rock. I lived on the border of Arkansas and Texas in a town called Texarkana, and then
yes,
it's that saying is it's twice as nice because it's really two cities in one. It's the Arkansas side and the Texas side.
Yes.
And then in high school, my family moved to Birmingham, Alabama, so I got to experience a different flavor of the South. Went back to Arkansas for college. And then after college, I lived in Little Rock and then Dallas. So Dallas is the big city.
Yeah. And I'm sorry that mic is finicky.
No, that's
it's
okay.
Really, if you crank it all the way.
There we go.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I went to college and got an accounting degree, a business and accounting degree, and went and practiced accounting out of college, got my CPA licensure, worked for a big firm called Arthur Anderson, which at the time was one of the big 6 accounting firms. I believe there's 4 of them now. We collapsed in the infamous Enron scandal. While I was living in Dallas and working for Arthur Anderson in Dallas, we collapsed in the Enron scandal.
Oh my
gosh. The group I worked with went to another firm called KPMG, another one of the big firms, and so So I practiced accounting for 8 years. During the last 4 of that, I was going to seminary, which for those that don't know what seminary is, that's grad school for people that want to go into some kind of ministry, typically Christian ministry. And so I was going to seminary, getting a 120-hour master's degree, which seems ludicrous in hindsight, but did a 120-hour master's degree, and also kind of simultaneous to seminary and working, I am doing a big consulting job in Denver as part of my work. I specialized in real estate tax. No, that doesn't get anyone excited, but it turns out that's a niche: real estate income tax for real estate investments. And so we had a big client here in Denver, and I got sent out here every summer, starting in the year 2000 through 2003. So 4 summers I got sent to Denver, lived here 3 to 4 months every year, and really fell in love with this city.
Yeah.
And when you live in Dallas, it's probably not hard to fall in love with Denver in June, July, August, and September.
Right.
So but I really fell in love with this city. I had a huge just heart for it, and began to see, especially in the urban part of Denver, I couldn't find churches that I felt like were doing a good job of really 2 things: being faithful to the original message of Jesus, kind of representing that well, but then also really trying hard to connect it to actual people. I saw a lot of older, kind of dying churches that didn't seem to be very engaged with what was happening all around them in the city. And so that began a process of exploration. A friend of mine named Dave Moreland, who I ended up starting our church with, suggested to me one day, his wife actually suggested to us one day that we should one day start a church together. And I said, I know the place, and began to describe Denver. And that's the short story of how we got here. I would say the backstory a little bit, to give you a little bit more detail. I was not really raised in a conservative church home. I was raised, which a lot of people in the Bible Belt are, and I was not. I was raised in a more liberal, progressive, intellectual home. We were church-going folks, but it was more of a modernist, kind of liberalized version of Christianity that had been adapted more to fit what modern people would believe. And so that was my world growing up. This discovery of this kind of what's sometimes called evangelical world, this more traditional Christianity, was a new and strange world to me. And so when I found Denver, I thought, this is the people that tend to live in Denver tend to be the people like the people I grew up with, and those are the people that I want to be a pastor for. That's the kind of city. I didn't feel awesome about going into a real highly traditional, settled, conservative culture and being a pastor there. That wasn't as exciting to me as being in a place like Denver, and so that's how I got here.
Yeah. Goodness. Okay. Many thoughts branching off of that. So in that sense, I mean, at least your home upbringing was advantageous to you, sort of melding into the progressive city that is Denver.
That's right. I'm very comfortable in that world now.
Yeah.
As a Christian, I have beliefs and convictions that are not completely meshed with that world. There's a distinction between my Christianity and kind of that world. But my experience is a lot of Christians who hold to the historic Christian faith, the traditional Christian faith. Sometimes we say the Orthodox faith that's been passed down for 2,000 years. In America, anyway, many of them are also accustomed to living inside a subculture that supports that and really props that up. So they tend to have their own insider language. They've got their own authors and celebrities in music and schools and colleges and magazines and publications ad infinitum. And they've kind of lived their whole life in that world. And and so as a result, they're actually not very well prepared to relate to people who haven't been in that world. And so I just thought, I am prepared to relate to people who haven't lived in that world. So that's what I want to do.
Yeah. And I mean, just growing up in Arkansas and for the time you lived in Dallas, did it feel like you were surrounded by, I don't know what the term is, but less open-minded people, or people who were just cut and dried? This is what a Christian looks like, you know?
Not really. And for this reason, and this was, if you haven't lived in the South, this may be hard to imagine, but the South is just as socially polarized as probably anywhere else in this sense, because we were a family that was more not evangelical. We didn't live in kind of the evangelical subculture. That was not my family's life. We didn't go to an evangelical church. We didn't interact with that world at all. So when I was 16, my family moved to Birmingham, Alabama, and we lived out in the suburbs of Birmingham, kind of on the growing edge of Birmingham, and there were no good public schools out there. And so my parents, because they have a high priority on academics and study and wanted me to get a scholarship to college, they said, we will put you in a private school so you get a good high school education. And the two best academic schools that were close by, one was a Catholic school and one was called a Christian school. It was run by a kind of an evangelical branch of Presbyterians. And so my mom took me to both of them and let me visit them. And you know, I thought the Catholic schools felt really strange to me. I didn't know anything about nuns and wearing uniforms to school. And all I could think of, like, at the Christian school was like, well, at least those people dress kind of normally and the teachers dress normal. So I'll just go there. But they were really good at explaining what historic Christianity is. And when they explained it to me, I remember thinking, I've grown up in church my whole life. I've been part of Sunday schools and youth groups and that kind of thing. I've never heard this. So what I thought Christianity was and what it actually is were not the same. And I had no clue about that. Now, I also got introduced, this school kind of existed in that evangelical subculture, so I also got introduced to this whole subculture that most of the kids I was going to school with had grown up in, and it was totally weird to me. So my experience was like this. I really enjoy the fact that this school has helped me, and these teachers have helped me see what actual Christianity is. That was really interesting. And
what age was this? I'm sorry.
I'm
if you
16
said,
years old at this point.
Okay, yeah.
I'm 16 years old, and I'm going, I'm so glad that they've helped me see what actual Christianity is, because I thought I knew what it was, and I really didn't.
Yeah.
When you just read the original documents, when you just read the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, kind of the Gospels, and you read the letters of the early church, I thought, man, what I thought Christianity was and what they were saying it was were completely different. So that was really, really helpful. And then I had this other experience which went like, and this whole bubble they live in is totally strange and weird to me. So it was this this dichotomy of, I love this original Christianity. I don't so much like their music and their politics and their, you know, and a lot of these other things that go with the subculture. So that was real formative. I couldn't work all this out when I'm 16, you know, articulately. Sure. But as I grow up and kind of mature in my faith, I become aware that, like, what I really want to be able to do is have original Christianity without a lot of the subculture-ish trappings that have built up around evangelicalism. And I think if I could do that, then a lot more people like me who probably think they know what Christianity is and actually don't, I could make it accessible to them. So
yeah. Gosh, that's quite a bit of foresight and insight for that age. I'm curious, are you what are you in the Enneagram, if you don't mind saying?
I'm an Enneagram newbie, but I'm an 8. They say that's what the tests say.
Gotcha.
I'm an 8, which you may know what that is. I can't remember what it is.
Okay. I only presumed that you'd be deeply steeped in it because I found out of it because of people in fellowship.
That's right. That's right. They're teaching me about it right now.
Yeah. Anyway, the point behind that question was I was wondering if you were maybe a 5, just that sort of deep thinker who unwraps things, and not that a non-5 can't be a thinker, of course, but that's just interesting. And so do you think it was at that age that your sort of true faith came about? You know what I mean? Just
for sure. Okay. I would say for sure. And I don't think you can be a Christian without understanding what it is. Now, there's more than just understanding. It's not just an intellectual thing. But certainly that's a huge part of it, is to understand what is this at a basic level. And I simply didn't understand. Like I was ignorant. Yeah. And I was the worst kind of ignorant. I was the kind of ignorant where you don't know you're ignorant and you actually think you know. So when they would sit down and go, here's what Christianity is, and they would open the book of Matthew and show me what Jesus taught. They would open Romans and show me what Paul taught. And I'd be like, well, that isn't Christianity. I would argue with them, and they'd go, well, why is it not? And I'd be like, because that's what I thought. It's like I had no basis of kind of authority or knowing, and it's just what I had assumed. And I found it actually to be far more interesting than I had assumed. In fact, by the time you're 16, I was probably to the point in my just development where church and Jesus, what I understood him to be, was like a conscious part of my life, but it wasn't an important part of my life. So I would not look at that as like, that's really important to who I am.
Yeah.
And I talk to a lot of people who that's their story. They'll say something like, I grew up in a family that went to church, and then I went to college. Usually it's college. And I really haven't been a Christian, or I haven't gone to church anyway. They may still call themselves a Christian, but I haven't been to church since I've been to college. And now that I'm into my adulthood and I've started my career and I've moved to a new city, it's really just not part of my life. And that's a little like light that usually goes off to me to say 9 times out of 10, if your story's like mine, which not all stories are like mine, but 9 times out of 10, that's a clue, and that's someone's story. That's a clue that they actually never understood what it was to begin with.
Yeah.
And because that was certainly my story. And so because I didn't understand what it was not compelling or interesting to me, and so it just wasn't really an important part of my life, although it was kind of there somewhere.
Yeah. So in moving forward a little bit, even though you had this in your mind that basically, I mean, you understood a way that you could perhaps present the gospel that would make sense to people who thought the way that you did in these progressive cities like Denver in particular. So going to accounting school, was there an inkling then, or even an assurance then, that you would be teaching? Or did you think at one time, like, Hunter's just going to be an accountant, a CPA forever?
That's right. I didn't think I would ever, I'd never thought I would be an accountant. So when I went to college, I asked my dad. My dad is one of just the wisest, kind of practical, how do you navigate life guys. He's just he's a wise guy in terms of practical wisdom. And so I asked him when I was going to college, my long-term goal was to go to law school. And I said, what should I do if I want to prepare for law school? The conventional approach is you get a liberal arts degree, which I kind of wish I had in hindsight. But anyway, he said, it'd be really good if you could pair a business degree with law. And then he said, and the only business degree that's worth the paper it's written on, I think my dad would probably say the only business degree that's worth a damn is accounting. All other business degrees are not worth anything. and as someone who did a very rigorous accounting program, I would say that's right. I mean, the marketing majors, marketing is like, business for athletes, and management is like business for slightly smarter athletes, and and maybe finance is legit, but
Sure.
accounting is the most rigorous business degree. So he said, get an accounting degree, and then go to law school. So I thought, okay, I'll do that. And probably midway through my accounting degree, I realized I probably didn't want to go to law school. And I actually lived with some law students my last year in college. And I actually also had a big interest in politics. So I thought I'll go to law and then I'll be involved in politics and public service somehow. And a couple of my roommates' families were very politically active. One of the guys I lived with, his family his father was a U.S. representative, and I actually kind of saw their life, and I thought, nah, I don't want to be in politics.
Yeah.
And so that really ended. And about the time that is starting to die as a desire, these accounting firms come around and start recruiting you and offering you money, pretty decent paying jobs. And I'm like, well, I can do that for a little while.
Right.
And so I just took a job really out of default. So I kind of fell into it. And then I remember day one on my accounting job, I remember sitting at my desk day one, and they brought me a client's file to work on. And I was going to prepare the state income tax return for this corporation. And they bring it to me. I remember opening it up and looking at it and going, oh no, this is just like what I learned in school. And it wasn't that interesting then, and it's not that interesting now.
Oh, goodness.
So I probably knew about day one that I was not long for the accounting world.
Right.
Although it was 8 years.
Yeah. Goodness. That can be a pretty sinking feeling. I mean, on day one, how did you, was it just drudgery, or did you find a way to, enjoy yourself kind of?
Both of those.
Okay.
Both of those.
Yeah.
The work was pretty drudgerous. The people, the company, the clients were interesting. I enjoyed the people side of it. And actually, as you progress, I like to say this to a lot of folks that start in their career, it's most boring. Any career is most boring when you start. And so as I progressed in the accounting world, got a couple of promotions, get to work on more sophisticated work, the work becomes far more interesting. Even if it wasn't my long-term field of work, it's not as drudgerous as it was day one.
Yeah. And so then the leap into pastorhood, I know that's not a term maybe, but when and how did that finally come about?
What really sparked that for me was after college, for the first time in my life, really, I was part of a really good church. And I'll describe it to you as I experienced it. I didn't have all these language, but here's what I experienced. I experienced that the teaching in the church was really good, and they would just open the Bible, they would explain it, but they would always explain it in a way that it meant something for where I am today and how I live and where my life is going. So it was just really good. And as they taught, I was like, the Bible is a really fascinating book. It really makes sense out of life and the world and why the world is the way it is and what the hope is and all that. It just made sense. And so it was just interesting. So I got into that like you discover an author and you love all their work and you want to read it all because it's just sparks all these incredible thoughts. That was my experience being taught. So the church was really good at that. And then secondly, they had a really vibrant community, so fun people, good people to be with. And then thirdly, they were really, really strategic about what they were doing. So I would have described it like this. They run this church like a business. And I would have just not meant that derogatorily, like they're just trying to make a bunch of money off religion. I would have meant it like they have a plan and they know where the church should go, and they talk about it with the church, and they say, here's why we should do this, and let's do it. It's going to require all of us to get on board, and then they take us there and we do it, and it just felt really intentional, really well thought out, really well led. So I began thinking, if I could marry the kind of teaching I got with that intentionality and that community, that's dynamic, and that's when I decided to get into pastoring, or go study to get into pastoring. I actually went to one of the pastors and asked them, said, what should I do if I want to get into this? And his answer was, you should go to seminary and get a theology degree and learn Bible and theology so you have something to say. And I thought that was a really good idea. I had some speaking experience. I had some public speaking experience at this point in my life. In fact, I've been doing public speaking since I was in junior high. So I thought, I know how to get in front of people and talk. I don't really have anything to say. So I need to get some training or I won't have anything to say. But if I do have something to say, I already know how to talk. So that's my simple thinking. And so I did. I started taking classes at seminary to get advanced degree in Bible and theology, so I'd have something to say.
Yeah. And did that sort of study appeal to your personality type?
I love the study.
Yeah,
I love the study.
Probably to this day, I assume.
To this day, yes. Now, there's kind of two branches, and I liked one more than the other. So they teach you in seminary, you do a bunch of Hebrew and Greek because the Old Testament is originally written in Hebrew, and all the New Testament documents were originally written in Koine Greek. So you study Hebrew and Koine Greek, and you get proficient in them. And that was not my favorite thing, although it was very helpful. I'm so glad that I had those, but it was technical. It was a lot of memorization, a lot of flashcards. I'm much more inclined to the ideas. So the part that I really geeked out on was the history of Christianity and the history of Christian thought. Like, how have Christians looked at the Bible and understood it at different points in history? Why do they understand it? You can start to see how their culture and what was going on in their day and the philosophical movements of their day influence how they read the Bible. And so you see all that. That fascinated me. Theology, which is typically like, how do you put the whole Bible together so it doesn't contradict itself, fascinating to me. So the thought side was really interesting.
Yeah. So I am curious, just being a pastor in Denver, and I think you've said from stage before 8 or 9 years now?
10 years now.
10.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So one whole element of that is you've probably seen Denver change enormously. I mean, I've only been here 5 years, and I feel like it's a different city than when I got here. But Denver is interesting to me, and I might be off on this. I mean, because I grew up in Albuquerque for 21 years, and Denver is hugely different. I mean, we've used that term progressive several times, but Denver feels to me similar to New York or Los Angeles or Portland or Seattle, in that it's very forward thinking. It's hip and trendy, and young creative people are here who make tons of money, and they set the tone for the rest of us, as opposed to Nebraska, where I was born, and the people I knew then are still there, basically. Not that they're dumb or something like that, or less intelligent, but it's just a completely different way of living. So all that to say, I guess at this point I'm just describing how I feel in the midst of Denver. It's not a popular time to believe in Jesus, and perhaps it never has been. But how is it just being a pastor in the midst of this, knowing how to, approach people on the street, or not literally like going up and witnessing to them, but I'm sure all kinds of people walk into Fellowship Denver and they probably, make a beeline to you after the sermon. Is that daunting? Is it intimidating? Is it scary? What are your thoughts?
One of the things you have to do is, I have to do as a pastor, is help people even be interested or motivated to learn what Christianity is and what it means. And part of that is because that's for a couple of reasons. One of the reasons is a lot of people are kind of like 16-year-old me. They think they know what it is, and they're like, and I already know what that is, and I don't really need that.
Right.
So that's a huge motivator. The other factor is that most of them have a way of making sense of life. It may not be really well thought out, but they have a functional way of making sense of life that they feel like is working for them.
Yeah.
And so now what I've experienced and believe, and because I've experienced it over and 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 over again, is Christianity has resources: intellectual, spiritual, emotional, communal, I mean, multidimensional resources, and I mean that in all those ways that you can't get anywhere else. It's unique.
Yeah.
It has a unique message. It has a unique power. It has a unique community. It has a unique ethic. It has a view of God that's unique. I mean, it's just unique. But most people think that they can get everything they need somewhere else. And so a huge part of my job is just helping people see why they need to give this consideration, why it might not be what they think it is, and how it's unique. That's a big part of my job.
Yeah, meeting people where they are. It seems
right.
like whatever facet of that they connect with most, it seems
that's exactly right.
is kind of the entryway. Okay,
that's exactly right.
Interesting. Yes. What, if any, this is a bit of a different question, but in the course of this, what have been your crises of faith or moments, if any, and however much or little you're willing to share, but just moments when you are a pastor and then all of a sudden you just get slammed with either one night or 3 months of huge doubt.
Yes.
What does that look like?
Or a couple of years. I think every Christian at some point has a crisis of faith that goes like this. And for some people, this is why they would go, yeah, I know what that is, and I just don't need it anymore. Is there always comes a point, despite everything I just said, it has unique resources, it is powerful, it's attractive, but all that's true, and this is true too. So there are times when it just doesn't appear to work. And it's usually because we have some expectation of what God was going to do for us, and it didn't happen. I mean, that's so it can be anything from I thought you were going to let me live in a intact 2-parent family until I graduated high school and went to college, and that didn't happen. My parents got divorced. Can be anything from that to I thought this has been I'm 43 and never been married, so this has been my particular struggle. Like, well, I would just assume, Lord, if I'm serving you and doing your will, like you would provide a beautiful girl who also loves you to be my partner for life.
Right.
Hadn't happened.
Yeah.
And you, despite my efforts and my prayers, it just hasn't happened. So it's easy when things don't work to start to go, what is the point of all this anyway? Which is actually a great question.
Sure.
It's actually a great question. What's the point of all this? You may have had the wrong end of the stick in terms of what the point is, but it's very easy to go, what's the point of all this? And then just to throw up your hands. And, not all Christian communities are healthy places. And so this is the other thing that's hard for people to wrap their minds around. Even though the Christian message is true and beautiful, because it is given to us through people, and we experience it in a community of other people messed up like ourselves.
Yeah.
Sometimes the brokenness of the people overwhelms the message, and they no Christian absolutely lives up to the message of Jesus,
yes.
Which is actually why we need to be Christians. So,
sure.
But no Christian lives up to the message and the teaching of Jesus. And sometimes communities of Christians, churches, fail so dramatically and so cataclysmically and so drastically that people start to go, well, if that's the fruit of this message, why do I need it? I totally get that.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's a living parable of why we need it, really.
Sure.
But it's so hard to see through all that and to go, the marriage is, or the message is good, even though my experience has not been. I kind of slipped up and said marriage, but it's very similar to someone who would say, who has been married and it was an awful marriage and it ended in divorce, and it was just a unhealthy, dysfunctional relational mess. And they're actually much healthier now that it's over.
Right.
It's very easy for them to go, marriage is ridiculous.
Yeah. Just be embittered forever.
Man, who needs men? Who needs women? You know, marriage is it's just a failed thing. And in fact, that's not the case. What marriage is supposed to be in its ideal is beautiful and worth pursuing, but your experience really was bad, and that's because you guys are broken people. So that's sometimes people's experience with Christianity as well, and I find actually a lot of that in Denver. I find a lot of that. In
Definitely.
fact, I think in some sense the West has always been a place where folks go to get away from either tradition or their own history back east and start over.
Yeah.
And so this is a place where a lot of people move to start over, and
Yes.
Christianity is part of the story in the background that wasn't working for me, and so that could be tough.
Yes, that does seem so true, because you can sense just in conversation with people, like their little red flags go up pretty quick if they find out you're a Christian or you go to a church and maybe they had some history, like you said, with it. And that actually leads to something I wanted to ask in particular. I feel like it is especially prominent lately with people my age, millennials. I'll just use the term, the dirty term that we keep getting called. But
how old are you?
It's like 29.
You're definitely a millennial.
Right. Yeah. But it's a weird, as an aside, it's a weird thing to be of a generation and also being called that generation in the present, were baby boomers called baby boomers at the time? I don't know. Or was that did that come later? And then the generations were like, this is what a baby boomer was. But where we live is, older generations say, this is what a millennial is. You're all like this.
You're all like, they stereotype you.
It's like, no, I don't do that. Anyway, that's a digression. So many people my age are leaving the church right now, and not because they're done with faith with Christ, but they're just burnt out basically. And it's like the arc seems to be so similar. I know so many people with this story of just grew up in a very conservative upbringing, Baptist church or whatever, evangelical. Around age 18 started realizing, hey, this is maybe not right. And then by age 25, they're like, this is definitely not right. And then they spend a few years as an adult, trying to hopscotch around churches and be like, where's that thing that looks like what I think Jesus would have done? And then they're just like, I'm fed up. I'm over it. I'm done. I still love Jesus. We're going to do this little home church thing. So anyway, and I all that to say, I'm kind of there, but also trying to assess it with a larger view and with maturity, and just not be one of those people that just gets fed up and bails. I don't think any church is perfect. There's no way it could be, because it's made of broken people. But I don't know. Is that whole thing that I just described in your eyes recently happening more than often, or has that kind of always been the case?
It appears that there's just the pure demographics say that that's happening in a way that's beyond what we've ever experienced historically. So if you look at the Pew Research Group, does a lot of good research on religious attitudes in America. And if you look at what they're saying, the percentage of people who call themselves NONE, none, which means they check none to religious affiliation.
Oh, okay, sure.
Or they would say they're a Christian, but then they're not a practicing Christian. They're not part of a community. They're not part of a church.
Yeah.
Is both of those numbers are going up, and they're going up the most among younger Americans.
Yeah.
So it appears that demographically this is absolutely happening. That doesn't explain why it's happening, but it does say this is not just something we feel, like this is objectively happening.
Yeah. Yeah. And have you spoken to people with sort of that, people in, my age with that story, and what do you say to them? I know every story is different, but yeah.
Well, when we start to go, why is this happening?
Yeah.
My sense is, and best I can tell, from both talking to people and reading and studying this, it's a combination of cultural trends where the combined effect of them is producing this. Now, that doesn't mean all of those trends are present in everybody's story. So it doesn't mean like your story is going to have these 18 factors. Mm-hmm. But culturally as a whole, there are a number of factors that are contributing to this, and everyone's story probably has a few of those, one or two or three of those. So this is kind of off the cuff. I could probably give you some of those factors off the cuff if you want to talk about them. I will probably leave something out that's really important, but off the top of my head, I would say here's some factors that are happening. Number one, Christianity in America has, for a long time, since the colonial era, been very culturally comfortable, where the predominant worldview of the culture also supported the basic Christian beliefs and lifestyle. Yeah. So the way I like to describe that is, if parents would often teach their kids at home, and then the kids would hear the same thing when they went to church on Sunday, and then they would hear the same thing when they went to school on Monday. Mm-hmm. So public life, church life, home life, all supports the same view of the world. Yeah. To be a Christian today, that's not true. It's simply not true. Often public life and church life are saying different things. And so a lot of people were cultural Christians. And now that the culture doesn't support Christianity, they're not, it's hard for them to be a Christian. Right. A second factor is, this really goes to something Jesus talked about, which has been terribly misconstrued now, but he talked about, in order to see what he called the kingdom of God, you must be born again. There's a work that God has to do in you to enlighten you, and he does that for you. And he was saying that he said that in the Gospel of John, I believe it's chapter 3, to a very respectable, religious, moral, wealthy man named Nicodemus, who was just like he wasn't like the broken. People often think born again means like you were a mess, your life was a mess, right, and you were addicted and you were strung out, and then you got born again, and it's often used that way. This is a guy who wasn't addicted to anything except his own prestige. He was just, you would think he was a great guy. And Jesus is like, all your family, your morality, your wealth, which in his society was not like ill-begotten, it was honorable. None of that matters. You got to have this new birth, and that's what he requires of all his followers. So I think there's a lot of people in America who have been culturally raised Christian, and who have not had that experience. Right. And so then when the culture doesn't support Christianity, it's like easy to go, well, okay. So that's the second factor. I think a third factor is that churches have are not accustomed to having to live up to the ideals of Jesus, really. And so there's a lot of Christian churches that really don't look distinctive in any way, in their message or in the lives of the people in them. And so, and the reason it doesn't have any credibility is because it's not the real thing, and that's very jading to people. I think a fourth factor is this and this is where churches really get in trouble. The culture we live in is so consumeristic, which means we are accustomed to shopping for everything, and a consumer wants to maximize benefit for the lowest possible price. And so the way I like to describe it is like, I quit shopping at Super Target a few years ago because it was costing me too much, not in terms of money, but in terms of fighting traffic on Colorado Boulevard, which was horrendous. And I was like, it is just not worth the extra hour of my week to go to shop at Super Target. I'll go shop at the Safeway that's around the corner from me, even if I'm going to pay a little more because it's going to cost me less in time. That's a consumer mindset. I can get the same thing over here for a better price.
Yeah.
And so churches have really accommodated that and basically said, let me sell you Jesus in a way that will meet your needs at a very convenient price to you. And the result of that is not very good, because for what I just described earlier, for everyone there comes a point where Jesus doesn't meet your needs as you define them. And so a consumer looks at that and goes, man, the cost has gotten high and the benefit's gotten low, and this isn't working. And churches are just trying to go, no, just stick around, it will work. Right. So I think a church that's really built itself around accommodating consumers is going to not be very credible in the end. And so that's contributing a lot to it. Right. Intellectually, we've changed a lot, and we're in a different place intellectually than we were even 50 years ago. So that's contributing to it. Americans are highly individualistic. They tend to, which means this: we tend to see the individual as the primary reality, sometimes to the exclusion of other corporate realities. So, and this affects Christianity. So the way I like to describe it to people is, I love when I hear people talk about marriage, because they'll typically talk about marriage in a way that, like, this is going to be a mutually beneficial relationship. You're going to grow and I'm going to grow, and we're going to grow together, and we're going to support each other. And life is tough, and the world is tough and cutthroat out there. So we're going to create this little private sanctuary that supports us, and we're going to get our needs met. But it's basically, we get into it for our individual benefit.
Sure.
What we don't see is that we've created this other entity called our marriage, and it's actually a thing. So like there's Emmy, and then there's a third thing called your marriage.
Yeah.
And that is its own reality, which has its own benefit. But people don't even see it as a reality. They don't even know it exists. It's like some country they've never heard of.
Right.
And so it's very easy then for people to say, especially when it comes to what they'll commonly call organized religion, it's very easy for them to say, if I'm not feeling the individual benefit of this right now, then it must not have any value.
Yeah.
And so I can still follow Jesus. I'll just do it on my own as an individual. That'll be easier.
Sure.
Without recognizing that there is this thing called the church, and the early Christians will also sometimes call it the body of Christ, that is its own thing and has its own reality and has benefits above and beyond just the private benefit of individuals.
Yeah.
And we just don't see, and this is not just a Christian problem, we just don't see corporate reality in America. All of this is contributing to the number of people who would either say, I'm not a Christian, or I am, but I'm not part of a faith community.
Yeah. That's well said. Thank you for that answer. That is helpful to hear, and that you, well, aren't just completely daunted by it. I mean, I know that part of that's personality, but there's probably some pastors who have like thrown in the towel because of these realities in the culture. You know, even recently, something you said about just being culturally raised, and sort of the many voices that contribute to our thinking. I on this show, in the course of the last year, we talk a lot about social media, and at least Andy and I we have a precarious relationship with it, where we mostly view it as a net negative and have tried as much as possible to remove ourselves from that, except in ways that are healthy, perhaps. But I bring that up because that is just an added layer of voices. I mean, all you have to do to feel bad these days is log into Facebook or Twitter and see people that you know yelling very strongly about the political world or social justice. And I think that stuff just digs in, whether or not you agree upon reading it. You start to think, oh, okay, like maybe a Christian is supposed to be gay affirming or whatever it is. We don't have to go there specifically. I just mean, when you see other people, you know, shouting it so boldly and knowing that they also claim Christ, then it start, at least for some personalities, it's like that seeps in, and then you have this tension between what you believe the Bible or God to be saying, and then the culture being very loud against that. I know that's always been an element to a degree,
right? For sure.
But
and you think about what a child is. A child typically doesn't think very nuanced. A child is usually pretty black and white about everything. They can't distinguish between there's these things that are black and white, and then there's these other things that like are more sophisticated.
Yeah.
They can't distinguish. I think it's just right or wrong. So a child thinks in pretty simple terms about everything, is pretty emotionally immature, meaning a child, whatever they're feeling, they're expressing. I mean, it's just there's not a lot of ability for a child to kind of step back and go, now I know I feel provoked about this, but you know, do I really need a cookie right now? They're just like, yeah, so that's it.
Right.
And to the extent that we are immature, I think social media magnifies it. It draws it out of us easily. It's very easy to get caught in it promotes simplistic thinking because it's thinking that has to be reduced to 140 characters. I think it also draws out kind of our emotional reactivity a lot. And so I have a complicated relationship with it too, because on the one hand, there are benefits of connecting with people and then also finding good resources that are out there that social media benefits from. I think it tends to reduce critical thinking. Think of the difference between spending 30 minutes reading through a Twitter stream and 30 minutes just reading a really good book.
Yeah.
The way your brain is engaging in the book versus the social media is so different. So it doesn't really promote nuanced, critical thinking, and it doesn't really promote emotional non-reactivity. So we have time to think. Yeah. Which this is actually, I think, one of the great apologies for why people should be part of a church even when they don't feel like it. Because a church doing church life in a way that hasn't completely catered to consumerism, you know. So they haven't just dumbed down the message to 15 minutes of life living skills, you know, let's get you in and out in an hour with they haven't completely dumbed it down. A church with a robust life, to participate in it requires a higher level of thinking, non-reactivity. So it typically means this: I'm going to go to a service on a weekly basis. I'm going to listen to a message that's an explanation of the Bible for 30, 40, 45 sometimes minutes. Then we're going to sing, we're going to reflect, we're going to pray. And a lot of people don't do much of anything besides go to the movies for an hour and 15 minutes, hour and a half at a time. Right. So that requires a level of thinking. Then to take a next step and go, not only am I going to be a Sunday attender, I'm going to be relationally involved in this community. I'm going to have some people I show up with to meet with on a weekly or every other week basis, something like that. And, there's going to be some weeks where I just show up and those people are just so freaking dull. And it's so boring and the conversation's bad and the cookies are stale, you know? Right. And then there's going to be some weeks where it's like, man, that was a fantastic conversation. And there's going to be some in between, which is that's how all relationships work. These rhythms actually recondition us in a culture that's quick, soundbite, not critical thinking, these rhythms actually condition us to slow down, to be reflective, to be in it for the long haul, even when there's not an immediate payoff. These are like all skills we need to become adults, and to be part of a church actually requires those skills. And anything worthwhile, you have to bear with a lot of crap to get to it, right? So, I'm fortunate to know a lot of older married couples, and the ones that have a really dynamic relationship. It's the kind where one of them dies and you go to the funeral and you're just weeping because of how the husband is talking about his dead wife or vice versa, right. and the kind of marriage my grandparents had, right? They'll all tell you, like, there were years where we had to endure a really way below ideal relationship. Yes. And in fact, I mean, she was totally the problem, or he was totally the problem. And I go, you know what? If what the early Christians called the body of Christ, and Jesus called it the church, he's actually the one that used that term to describe his people. If it has the same kind of potential to be beautiful and glorious and transformative, then surely it's going to require us to put up with a lot of crap to get that. And I wouldn't expect it any other way. There's nothing I've ever done worthwhile that I didn't have to just put up with a lot of stuff to get to the transformative moments.
Right. Yeah, that is so true, and it isn't modeled for us very much in American society. I mean, I almost can't think of any way that is directly like displayed in front of us. It almost has to be experiential, it seems like, and we're not a culture anymore in all of the West, regardless of age group, of being slow and of waiting and
That's
taking
right.
time.
It has to be experienced, and it can only be experienced slowly over time. So I would say to probably anyone, 5 years minimum is what you need in a church before you'll probably begin to see a lot of the beauty of it. And I say that because in 5 years you will probably have been disappointed. You will probably have been, within 5 years you'll probably been around long enough to where something that the church has done or taught, or the way the leaders have led, or somebody you've been disappointed.
Yeah.
You'll probably, during that time, most of us go through some kind of personal difficulty and struggle at least once every 5 years. That's I haven't had a 5 year struggle-free run of life. I've had some years that were great, and I've had some years that were bad. So within 5 years, you'll have had to personally go through something probably difficult. Maybe not life-threatening, gut-wrenching, but difficult, disappointing. You will probably in 5 years have vacillated from I love my faith and following Jesus to this just feels dull and lifeless to me.
Yeah.
All of that will have probably happened. And so and if you stick with it for 5 years or more, you can really begin to see the beauty on the other side of all that struggle. But if it's just really short, then you short circuit yourself from having to go through the experience that will actually bring the joy on the other side.
Right. Yeah. Goodness. I love that you're able to speak about that without being, or at least in this moment, not frustrated about it at other people for, just jumping ship after 6 months. Because I do think there are some who would be just so daunted and feel like that's their main obstacle, is like, how do we just get people to stick around? And maybe there is some consideration of that, but I am curious, and if you're going to say something to that, go ahead.
I was going to say it's a huge obstacle, and I just assume that unless we go through a cataclysmic cultural change before I die. It's just always going to be an issue.
Yeah.
So it's one of those problems that's never like solved.
Sure.
It may be solved for you. You may get to a place where you're like, okay, I'm going to do that I'm going to take the 5-year challenge and stick it out. But for every person that says I'm going to do that, there's hundreds more who are still wrestling with it. So I just assume as a
Right.
pastor, like I'm going to be doing this for the rest of my life. And so
Sure.
if my satisfaction is based on I don't have to deal with that problem anymore, well, I better get out of this now.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
I am curious what your, just as a pastor in Denver for as long as you have, and fellowship specifically is about to be in our new building, and
Right.
what gets you just excited and invigorated about continuing to be a pastor here in this city in this day and age? Because fellowship is not one of those churches that's just like, let's be trendy to get the people in. Like, that's clearly not your and Dave's desire or hope, or to just become some mega church or become like popular pastor authors or something. So what do you get excited about? Yeah.
I think when you look at the history of Denver in particular, it's been a long time. Probably, if we just go back to say, within Denver, in the 1950s, we were really seeing Christianity was having a lot of influence in the city. It's been a long time. It's been 60, 70 years, which means a couple of generations have come and gone since the church has, and I mean that kind of in a big sense, has been really a critical part of the fabric of this community. Has been, and I don't mean like dominant. I just mean an important part of the fabric of this community, where for the people who would be inclined to examine their foundations a little bit more carefully and closely, and know who is God and what is He like, and how can we know Him, and can we know Him, and if we can know Him, should I even attempt to try to figure that out? You just haven't had many options in to do that in 60, 70 years, and so we're living in a time where that's changing, and that's exciting to me. When I moved to Denver 12 years ago, we started the church a little over 10 years ago, I could count on one hand, the number of churches in Denver proper, I'm not counting the suburbs here, but in Denver proper, who were probably about the two things I mentioned earlier, original Christianity and actually engaging it with people, trying to help people see it. I could count that on my hand, and it would take both of our hands plus some now to count the number of churches that are doing that. So that just excites me. I feel like Fellowship Denver is just one part of something much bigger that's happening in Denver, and that excites me. So it's a fun era. So if you put these two things we just talked about together, on the one hand, as a whole, our American culture, and this is certainly represented in Denver, probably even more so than a lot of parts of America, is becoming post-Christian, less inclined toward Christianity, toward church, toward organized religion. So that's one trend. And yet, on the other hand, here's the same thing that's happening. More and more churches that are trying to connect with them are coming into existence and flourishing and growing. So both of those things are happening at the same time. And I just go, what a time to be alive. That's fun to be part of.
Right. Yes, absolutely. The that made me think that just the deepest interest, perhaps that's not the right way to phrase it, but just the way that some of these ancillary people or people on the outside could become interested in actually engaging for 5 years seems to happen more on a one-to-one level, or an individual attending one of these home groups or something. And even this might be a weird element to meld in, but even in secular culture, just this idea of vulnerability is very, and being authentic and all that, which I think is advantageous, at least because people are being more upfront with their garbage, and that just gives a leeway into real conversation,
right?
As opposed to just a facade of happiness all the time. So that is interesting.
Well, the message of Jesus and the power it has always comes into the cracks and the brokenness in us. It doesn't. Jesus goes, those who are healthy have no need of a physician. I came for the sick, right? So the people who didn't get who he was and what he was about were the people that thought they were okay as they were and they didn't need him. And those were, in his days, those were called the Pharisees. That was a sect of Judaism, but that was his big enemies. And we often think of them as the conservatives, and which is actually a pretty unnuanced view of who they were. They were conservative on some things. They're actually very liberal on other things. The point was, they thought they had it together, and they didn't need it, and they didn't feel like they had any need. So anyone who thinks I don't have any need is the Pharisees, and so the first thing you have to is some sense of need, some sense of lack, or there's a crack, or there's a void, or there's a brokenness, or there's a problem, or there's something I'm missing, or there's some angst, or that's like base level prerequisite.
Yeah. And no one presumably survives this life without some bit of that at some point,
I wouldn't think so.
Yeah.
We live in, though, a secular world, and by that I don't mean that in the derogatory sense that Christians sometimes go secularism,
Right.
But here's what basically the secular world tells us. The secularism is itself a pseudo kind of religion. It offers hope, it offers meaning, it offers purpose. It kind of tries to make sense out of the big picture. What is man, and what does it mean to be a person, and what is the meaning of life, and what's the future that we can look forward to? How's the world going to be all fixed and put to right? And so what secularism essentially tells us in many different ways is we have everything we need to have the ideal life, the ideal future, to fix the world, and to have meaning and purpose. We have everything we need.
Yeah.
And we don't may say we don't need God, or they might say we do need God, but we don't need Christianity. But we have everything. Basically, we have everything we need as we are, and so to live in a secular world means that you're bombarded with the message that if you don't have everything you need, well, you just need to look around harder. The world has everything you need. It may just be you need to buy this product, or you need to listen to this motivational speaker, or you need to read this book. But it's all out there. It's all accessible. You've just got to get. And what Christianity says, actually, we don't have everything we need, and the world doesn't have everything we need, and the world as it is right now can't provide everything we need, and so we can't seek it kind of out there in the world. There's something we need that can only come from God, and until you get to the point where you say that might be true, then really, like, I got nothing for you, right? So I got nothing for you, because like that's my whole basis. Like, I think that's right. I think there's something we need that can only come from God, and it can't be found anywhere else. And until you at least get to that point, there's not a lot I got for you.
Yeah. Well, that is probably as good a place as any to wrap up. We were talking a little before we got on mic, but what have you been reading lately, fiction and otherwise?
Well, I'm reading The Idiot by Dostoevsky, which is only my second Dostoevsky novel, and the first one I read when I probably didn't even know what it was saying. That was Crime and Punishment, but it's fascinating. It's about a guy who most people think is an idiot, and he has this innocence about him. And he enters this Russian society in St. Petersburg that is all about money and sex and power and everyone's kind of working. Everyone's got their scheme. I mean, it's convoluted. Everyone's kind of working each other to get what they want, and putting on faces, and it's cutthroat. And this idiot enters this society, and he just has this innocent, not like naive, because he's actually very aware of evil in the world, and it comes out that he has some pretty strong opinions about good and evil, but he has no manipulative agenda, and so because of that, he's free just to be. He says whatever's on his mind. he can't. He's really hard to offend, and so the whole novel is about watching people interact with this strange presence, and I think like that must have been what Jesus was like, and ideally as followers of Jesus, that's what we would be like in the world. So The Idiot's fantastic. I'm just 100 pages in, but that's what's going on so far.
Goodness, it takes a much smarter man than I to write something like that. That is both just enjoyable fiction, but also like this deep social commentary and speaking to the human experience. But yeah, I like that just comparison to Jesus, because presumably the people around him were like, we don't know what to do with this guy. We don't know what box to put him in, because there isn't one. Probably
there wasn't a box.
Yeah. Well, do you feel good about this?
This is great.
You want to say?
So fun. My first podcast. Thank you, Josh.
Thank you.